of Pulse of Polynesia in the hot seat. Tonight we're doing something a little different, but before we begin, I'm your host, Leaso Filoili'i, coming to you live from Texas. And joining me in the hot seat is someone who's not just passionate about history, but determined to uncover the truth behind it. Our featured voice this evening is Chief Tasi Ayafe. And together we're diving headfirst into one of the most overlooked, undertaught, and misunderstood chapters in Samoan history, the Tutuila Wars of the 1800s. Before the flags, before the treaty, there was blood, there was loyalty, and there were warriors whose stories were never fully told. So get comfortable because tonight we're peeling back the layers of silence and to find the voices that were left behind. Welcome, everybody. I'll turn the
Aloha,
time to
audience.
Arlington.
Welcome back.
Awesome. Well, Arlington, I'm so grateful that we're able to talk about history of a lot of things that we've never been able to be taught in school. So, why don't I turn the time over to you to get started?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Liao. And it's so important that I know when we were through in high school, we touched a few subjects, and there's some common things that we've studied. But then now that we look back at history, we start to question
Mhm.
why haven't we've been told those stories when some other folks share stories about Tutuila or the wars and Upolu. We always ask ourselves, was Tutuila not involved in any of these wars? Are there any were any of our soldiers or warriors involved in any of those conflict? So you sort of see them sporadically, but um, you don't really hear anything giving credit to the Tutuila people. So um, this podcast is sort of unique for our audience because we will explore that in depth, but then also we wanted to make this more of an interactive. So if you have knowledge of the topic and you hear us stumbling, it's because we're presenting this more in a research type of format. So next thing we wanted to bring out, and I'll let you introduce this search engine or what we've been using lately, Lao. So,
All right,
so
let
if
me
you want to
share that.
introduce them to the Trove, or do you want me to go into it?
All right, so let me know if you can see it. All right. So Trove is what I was introduced to as I had conversed with Arlington in regards to finding information about our history, and a lot of these things that I found on here, you do not know about these things. It was never taught in our schools, and so getting into Trove, there's a lot of articles that were back in the late 1800s, 1700s. History that was recorded news articles and some of the pictures that were taken during that time. So here's an example of Trove. This is the website,
Yeah,
and yep. Go ahead, Arlington.
yeah, and like Lasso was saying, a lot of people probably have not used Trove. And most of us that are always in research, you're gonna go on Google or throw it in an AI
Hmm.
search. But Trove has been something used across the Pacific, so it's not unique to Samoa. But if you look across, all the other islands, most of those researchers they will tell you, "I live in Trove." So Fiji, Tonga, like even beyond the Polynesian islands, you have stories that are older than the Samoan stories that are also in here. Like it talks about your chiefs, the struggles, what happened, just all those unfortunate wars. A lot of that's documented in Trove, and what Trove is either magazines or newspaper articles of
Hmm.
those yesteryears. And what we find valuable, like myself and Lasso, is we've been using this for quite some time, and we'll find a topic that we struggle with or it doesn't seem clear on most of the books that we've researched, and we throw it in a trove. We'll throw in a name of a chief or someone like that in trove, put in the year of that specific chief, and then trove will spit out all these newspaper articles related to that public figure.
Yeah.
And then what's unique about that is now you read all these articles or naval logs or um, missionary logs because the missionaries had their own newspapers and articles that they sent back to London. They're all in different areas of Trove. So now you have all these at your fingertips, and you're reading these articles, and you're starting to say, okay, what I've been taught does not match what I find in Trove.
Yeah.
And I've come across several sources in Trove that contradicts what our history or our government site has, published over the years. And it's worth for us to investigate, not to say that our government is wrong or who is wrong, but
Hmm.
open up the debate. Let's do some more research and
Hmm.
question why there's such a discrepancy. Right, Lasso?
Right, I totally agree. The other thing that we need to be informed about is that sometimes when we go into these articles, you probably have a different information compared to what you were told for generation and forth. And so this is something important that you leave this earth, well, guess what, this information that you did not want to correct or have not taught yourself or your family gets passed on to the next generation. And that is very important to get a hold of and understand how this information works. It helps your family and the generations to come. Also wanted to make sure that everyone knows that Trove is for free.
Yeah,
So there, yeah.
love it. And there are a few folks that I come across, like my cousin Marion, who runs the American Samoa through the years Facebook page. I know Marion lives in there too. So all your great historians that are sharing, the historical content, whether it's Samoa, Tonga, or wherever, they're in Trove because they're also verifying all the other research with historical documents that you always want to have a second opinion on what these books have written. So let's take a step back. We talked about Kramer and we said, well, Kramer's controversial. How do I counter Kramer? Well, go and read Trove because Trove has articles that predates Kramer. So now
Yeah.
you have, some reference material and you see what Kramer wrote. Kramer was 1890s and 1903, I think. Trove goes back to 1850s. So there's a lot of things, I'm just go off topic for a little bit. Like 1840s and 1850s, you know, the blackbirding, right? That was going
Mhm.
on. But then also you'll find um, the missionary arrivals in all those other islands beyond Samoa. So now you have a good reference point when you're doing your research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's it's very let me just say that when I was going through Trove and reading some of the stories, there was just so much pride of who I am because of being able to understand like what our people had to endure and what they went through, but also just the amazing warrior spirit that our people had back in the day and how it continues on to our people now. And so I just love just reading the stories that comes from what was written and also their characters that they had, the humility and also the strength that they also possess. So just
no, you're
it's
exactly right, Lau. So
yeah,
it's a great opportunity for folks who the history books didn't bring, didn't talk about your family. And all of a sudden you go in a Trove. Why is my great 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 grandfather's name mentioned multiple times in here? He must have been an important figure. Why is his name mentioned along with these other, great leaders? And today, like our name is not, I'm just giving out just for an example. You may say we don't have a foothold or our name is not as significant as all these other names, but go back into these articles. My great 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 grandfather, his name is mentioned aside, Mataafa and Malitoa and
hmm,
Moma and Leyato, and you question what happened. What
yeah,
happened when our islands were divided. Now my family is, our name has been devalued, but you can restore your family's name by reading these articles, and it'll show what works your great 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 grandfather did and your families did. You can pull a lot of great stories and bring that to life. Push the
yeah,
governments and tell the story of my family and let's get my family recognized, right? So that's the other beauty of this is a lot of it was buried, but then these articles will revive um, that name for your family. So I just wanted to make sure we bring that up because there's a lot of families today who feel like, oh man, my family's worthless. We have no historical reference. And you come and look in there, and your name is all over the place. So
Right.
for those families, for our viewers, please do so. Throw your name in there. Um, you'll be surprised what you get. And yeah, share with us what you find.
Yeah, and I also want to add to what you just said, right? Um, we're so all about our family has been all about oral interpretations, and it just one story carries to the next person and the next person. But we have like these Balangis back in the day writing that information for us.
Right.
Well, it's time for us to write our stories. Now that we have this information from back in the day, we can compare it to our stories and do our own research and create our stories at the same time, because it's about time that our people start making this happen so it comes to life for the next
Yeah,
generation to come.
I agree with that, Lasso. And it's so important that you mentioned that is someone did a disservice to our families back then. Maybe our families' names weren't captured because, those Palangis didn't get a chance to visit, our village that's way, way back there. But, they were important. But this is an opportunity for you to go research and restore your family name and write it. Write something, bring it to life. And then for future generations, the more you promote it and bring it to life, us Samoans will recognize that. We'll say, thank you. That's a missing part of our history. I will honor your story because you told me where it was, and you have, backing proof that for whatever reason, someone wanted to bury it and hide it. But guess what? We found it.
Yeah,
We found a lot of information valuable to these families. Before we go further, Lasso, just wanted to read off some comments real quick. We got
sure.
viewers. So we got Janet. Hello, family. Janet from Oklahoma. Yeah, Talofa Janet. And Itangia. Got a salute, heart, and some cool shades there. Yeah. Hello, Itangia. Where are you from, Itangia? What segment are we going to start with, Lasso?
All right, let's start with the first segment, the Tutuila Wars of the 1800s. Now, the question I have for you is, what started the conflict between the Manuma, is it
Mhm.
how Manuma and Mangale? I believe the two are relatives. So let's start with there and how that started.
Okay. So just to remind our viewers that are tuning in late, we are introducing Trove. So if you're at a computer or your cell phone, just drop in trove.nla.gov.au. And it's an Australian website, but it captures most of the information from across the Pacific. So that's what we're going to use tonight. So every question Leas is bringing up, guess what? We're going to help you,
Okay.
and we're going to sample it for you, and we're going to throw it in the Trove and see what Trove spits out. And some of the history we do know, but what we're trying to do is you already know the history to it, but let's throw it into Trove and let's see if we might find some snippets that contradicts what the history books have said or what people have been publishing over the years, and we found those as truths. But maybe Trove will tell us otherwise. So okay, so we're gonna start with the oh, and also we try to isolate why the Tutuila warriors or Tutuila people seems like we never hear about their wars. But we're gonna also tell you that we have great warriors in Tutuila, but most of the stories aren't told. Or we're gonna
Yeah.
share those stories. So the first one we're gonna introduce is the Monga Wars, right? Monga of Pango Pango, and for the Monga families, we apologize. We won't do anything to deteriorate your name, your family name. I am also a descendant of the Taufasau families, but that doesn't give me a right to say, use this freely. But I'm just helping our audience understand what we're researching. So the first one we're going to use is um, the one that everyone has seen is Monga Lei and Monga Manuma. So if you want to type that in there, and we've already have the results on the side, but we're just going to see what happens if we type it in live.
Okay.
Okay, so you throw it in the search bar and it'll spit out several queries, or sometimes it'll tell you which one of these do you want to use, magazines or so let's try to narrow it down to newspapers, maybe not magazines. So I think if you click on the newspapers and gazettes,
Okay.
and let's see what that spits up. The first link is there a
So there's
clickable?
nothing in there under this name unless we type in the Tutuila Wars.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, there you
Okay.
go. Okay. So before we click on any link, somewhere, I know it's hard to see here, but it'll give you dates. So if you choose a date that's in purple, it's like the second line down. If you're mindful, just try not to click on something that says 1900 or two, 19 something. You want to go back to the time frame that that occurred. So we know that the war happened around the 1870 1880s time frame. So that tells us this article was published around 1878. So it sounds like a plausible link to gather, right? So, and we'll test it out. Let's see what it gives us. Okay. And what you'll find here on the right side is the actual newspaper article. And if you have good eyes and good guessing, you can probably make out what it is. But on the far left is the computer itself. There, it allows you as a viewer to go and edit what you feel, um, that article actually is. So, and you can go back and forth, and sometimes it's not accurate on the left. But then I always like what I usually do is I'll take the clipping, take that PDF, and then I'll throw it into my computer and I'll try to enhance it through Illustrator or Photoshop and get a clearer view. But sometimes if you zoom on the article itself, you can pretty much make out what the words are saying.
Now,
Or
now let me add another tip to that, Arlington.
yeah,
So, for all of you out there, this is another way to get this cleared out because I use a lot of AIs.
oh yeah,
So, what you would do is download the PDF, put the link of this exact link you would take and put it into ChatGPT. Make sure you have the upgraded version, put the link in the chat GPT and also the PDF file.
mm.
Create the prompt and ask ChatGPT to make out of what the article is about, and ChatGPT will give you the full article word for word. So that's
And
another way.
Lasso is teaching me how to use AI because our kids are all into that, and I'm learning. So if you're like me, old school, yeah, Lasso is gonna bring us up to up to the modern technology, expedite our research. So
I got a question for you.
yeah,
There's a question. Okay. This is from Janet. What does American Samoa teach us about the Tutuila Wars in the 1800s?
I guess it depends on who you ask, and we do know that um, American Samoa does cover like those early wars, the Mona Wars. But then what you'll find, to answer your question, what you will find is we call these non-field archaeologists, if you would say. And if you know what that means, is people that just go and read other people's research, just like, okay, me and Lasso
Um,
published this document that we found, and then all of a sudden someone else comes and follows up behind us, and they just take what we said, right, and they accept it as truths. But there's not no in-depth discovery or research or counter argument what they found. So that's the what I found a lot about the Samoa documents out there. They'll take what was written, whoever first published it, they will take that as truth, and they will never go and validate that or try to contradict it or find any other outside source that will challenge that reference. So hopefully that answers your question. And if you're out there and you're watching our podcast, feel free to drop in your answers as well. We'd like to see your
mhm.
perspective. Okay.
All right.
And then
So
so
go
going back
ahead.
to what you just found out, so
Hmm.
um, I know all of this is like tutorial, but I'm trying to make your life easier.
Hmm.
If you go back one segment, like to that search page that you were on,
Okay, got it.
yeah, just go
Okay.
back one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just bring back all those articles that you had. So
Okay.
what I'm asking Lasso to do is, if you come across a poorly copied article, what you'll find in Trove, there will be multiple links of the same article, maybe published at a different date. And if before you just sit on one and struggle with your eyes trying to figure out what it is, click on another one and then click on another one. You eventually you might come on a clearer article, so that way you're not
Mm.
struggling. So that's why you have multiple articles and just looking at the dates. If the title is about the same, then you know that it's referencing the same story. So just sort of giving you a little bit of a hints as you're navigating your way in Trove. Yeah.
Well, I do see that. Like, there's one that's Monday, 31st December, 1877. There's another one with different dates. Okay,
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
And it could be like another newspaper, another newspaper running the same article. So they'll all get the same information. You know how it is, like CNN and Fox, and they're all
Yeah.
publishing. So maybe one guy, his quality of work wasn't the best, and then the next guy, has some better ones.
Hey, and that's good to have all different perspective on different articles, and you never know. So,
Yeah, and then you may see like a month different. So what usually happens is, so let's say we're going back to the Monga Wars. You know, they may have an event that happened like in December, and then you see like, why is it repeated again in January? Well,
yeah.
maybe the war continued, and then now they update the situation and said, okay, the wars in Bango are continuing. Here is month two. It's the same title, but now we've added elements, or maybe we were incorrect about our assessment. We have more eyes on the ground, and here's the true story. So the later versions will paint a clearer picture than the earlier versions. So usually the later versions will say, you know, here's the what actually happened, and you have more sources who are confirming the story or adding on to the story. So don't just take the first one
Okay.
and run with it and say, no, 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 this is what I have. Like, no, just like, as a researcher, keep digging, keep digging.
Hey, that's a good point because I know a lot of people they just find the first article and they just run with it. So, always
Yeah.
good to check all different sources.
Okay. So let's pull out the latest one. Is it January 88?
Yes,
Okay.
January. This is the first one. That is correct.
Okay.
Okay,
Well, let's try the other
so,
one because that first one wasn't clear. Let's see if the second one has a
okay,
clearer image.
let's see.
And I think if you use that magnifying bar to the left of the right, yeah.
Okay,
And I think you might be able to zoom in on the article.
let me
Yeah.
get rid of this thing. Okay.
And thanks for being patient with us. We're just trying to walk you through. If you're on there too and doing your own research, maybe you're not interested in our article, you know, you can follow along with what we're doing. We're just trying to help you understand how to use these tools as you're doing your research. And then as you come across an article, feel free to zoom
Mhm.
in and just try to pick out what you feel might be important for you.
Yeah, this article is not as clear as the other one.
Try to hit that plus button,
Okay.
yeah, and see if you can keep on going in, but then move the article as you get closer. Yeah, there you go. Okay, there you go. We can sort of see what it's saying.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. So let's just go off of what we have there. So it talks about a great number of killed and wounded. The loss has been what, 11 killed and 7 wounded of the government party, right? Side of, okay, so I want to make sure this is the right war, because the war of these two Mongols, I thought it was 1883. So I think this is the Puletua War. Yeah. Okay.
So that's a different one, right?
Okay. Yeah. So that's
Okay.
okay. Let's stay here. So we're gonna move ahead. Like I was telling you, there was a there was an event that happened before their war, right? So before Manuma and Lei went to war, there was this person that you're looking at right here. This article right here is his name is Monga Puletua. So for any of our Monga families or anyone that are very familiar with who this Monga is, or if you have some understanding, because I know a lot of people are claiming that this is their Monga, but the only thing I can come across is the name Puletua. And
Mm.
how did Monga get the name Puletua? Monga, this Monga right here, before Monga Lei and Monga Manuma, he was a very strong supporter of Malietoa Laupepa. Now, I'll cover very briefly how Puletua got his name. In Upolu, Malietoa was fighting his own war, the bigger war that we talked about, everyone knows about, and that he was fighting against um, the other side of the leadership, right? So Malietoa formed his own party, and he called his party the Puletua. And if you know what the term Puletua means, you are, leading from behind. It was Taimua and Pule. Like you'll find in Trove, they'll say Taimua, and some will say Taumua and Pule. And so that was the rival clan. And Monga, this Monga right here, he supported Malietoa Laupepa. So every war there was, this Monga right here was very supportive of it. Eventually, what happened was Laupepa, Malietoa Laupepa, and his warriors were defeated. And as a result, this Monga right here, when he was at the war, um, they eventually what happens is they arrest him. But before they arrested him, this Monga right here, he's a true rebel. And like I said, this segment is to honor our Tutuila warriors, and we're trying to bring honor to this gentleman right here, Monga Pulatua. He was um, he was reckless. I mean, reckless in a good way. Like that gives us pride of his fighting stance and his
Hmm.
rebellious nature. Right? He's not just going to cave in, and even though
Yeah.
he's fighting against the superpowers, everyone else has all the guns and that against him. But you know, true Samoan heart. He's fighting for his people. So that's what I want to acknowledge. So that's how he got his name, because he was a follower of Malietoa Puletua, uh, Puletua War. So this one is telling about his battle um, against the government, and eventually he was on the losing side. The government sends all the you know their boats, the warships to come and capture
Hmm.
him, and eventually he surrenders. And that's what this article is, and it's telling his stance. Like he was going toe to toe with the larger element and never back down. Eventually he surrenders. um, so that's who Puletua is, and eventually he passes away, and there is now the rise of these two gentlemen um, that you were asking about. So if you want to segue and probably try to type in one of their names, maybe
Okay.
Manuma or Mongale.
Okay. Type in.
Yeah. And we're looking for, I believe it's 1880-ish, 1881, 2 or 3. And it's a common name, and that's why it's going to also bring in a lot of reference to like modern days. You might see some
Okay.
soft law reference because it's still
Mm.
newspaper articles.
Well, okay, let me do this again. Let me try um mm, Mauna Lei.
Oh yeah, and what I also noticed also is like the name Moma is also used across other Pacific islands, so you'll also see a lot of that come up.
Okay.
Okay,
So I'm wondering, should we put Tutuila Mau?
so sometimes if you misspell it, it'll take it. So instead of put Moma, put Manga, like manga.
Okay. Manga.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And then Tutuila and see what you get.
Tutuila. Tutuila.
Okay, so we have something there.
Oh, okay.
War on Tutuila. What year is that? So
Um,
1877. So that's still Puletua, because I think
okay.
Puletua dies in 1880 to 1898. So that would be after them. 1892. I think Monga Manuma is still alive. Lay. Okay. But to our audience, as you're looking through, you can see all these other articles that we're coming across, and a lot of it's not even talked about in our. Oh, there you go. There's one right there. 1883. Go up one.
Okay.
War in Samoa, the natives of Tutuila fighting. Yeah, I think it says 1883 to 1930.
To 1930. Yep.
Okay. Well, let's just try that one and see what it gives us.
Okay.
Okay, that's a good article right there.
Okay.
So what we're doing for our viewers is we're also trying to research and get the background. Sometimes you'll have the results of the war and you'll get them, you'll get a photo and said, they're talking it out and making peace on a battleship. But then you want to know, is there any article that leads up to that event? And that's what we're researching here. Okay. So that's a good one right there. The quarrel is said to be of a family of one, right? One family,
Yep.
originating in the rival claimants to the title of Monga. So, like we
Mm,
said, there were multiple Monga wars, but Monga Lei and Manuma was just one of the many Monga wars. And Monga or the head chief, but the matter has gone so far. So, it's unique that you sort of get a clearer picture leading up to the events. And so this is where you have to be careful on that line right there where this author is saying it's probably, we're assuming it's a political aspect. Now, what was going on at the time? So some of these authors were saying, you know what, Manuma is actually supporter of, um, Mataafa, right? So they're trying to tie the Tutuila Wars with a greater war in Upolu. So it's fascinating to read like these different articles, and then you'll have another article who is for or against Manuma. So as you're researching, and when you come across an article, don't take that as the only evidence, and you'll say, okay,
mhm.
Manuma was a political person. He was supporting Mataafa. You have to
Which
remember. Yeah, go ahead.
Mata'afa was a part of the German alliance, right?
Yeah,
Who?
um,
Okay.
the second time. The first time he was against the Germans, and then the second time, like before like the 1890s, he was for the Germans. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, give me a second. Someone is commenting here. So ifu manuia lausunga. Yeah, talofa
Mhm.
lava malo lava no so ifu moa. Thank you for joining us, and we're doing an open discussion right now. We're just doing regular research, and if anyone has any value to add to our story searching, you know feel free. Like, nothing that we gather are like facts, but what we're trying to do is paint pictures of the history that we know, and then we're doing more research and see what we can gather on these stories. And we're introducing most folks to this valuable website Trove, and it's unique to all of our Pacific Islanders. Oh, thank
Okay.
you. So he's a descendant of Mataafa. Perfect. So we are talking about your ancestors, and we welcome you to share your side of the story.
Mhm.
So we just mentioned. So what we're isolating is we want to give honor to our Tutuila warriors. Take nothing against the Greater Samoa. We know a lot about them, but very little is talked about Tutuila. So we're trying to say here are some wars that happened in Tutuila, and these people also supported the greater battles. Yeah. Hey, you said
Yeah, I
also
know.
you're also related to the Mutaafa family.
Yeah.
There you go. See, love this lesson, history lesson. Thank you. Lasso is a big history buff. I thought I was a big history person. I always talk history with Lasso, and then like, "Are you bored, Lasso?" And I said, "No, tell me more."
Yeah.
So found someone who has a equal passion in understanding or researching our history.
Yeah, it's fascinating because a lot of these things, it's like it just like what I mentioned before, there's pride to it. I feel like our ancestors want us to remember, you know,
Yeah.
they want us to remember our history. They want us to remember how it was for them. They don't want that to die down with the ground. It's something that we need to always remember. And
Sorry to
it's
our audience who
Moni's.
can't see what we're talking about. Lasso, can you pull those comments too, so that way people can see?
Yeah.
They're like, "What are you guys reading?" Oh, it's Moni. Talafa lava Moni. Yeah, so introducing people to Trove, and so some of the back history to some of these events leading up to those fightings. Okay. Why hasn't the Tutuila warriors received any recognition for the loyalty to support their wars in Upolu and Savai? Um, yeah, we're gonna get into that, and we're trying to paint the picture here. It was sort of like the question what I think Moni was bringing up. So give us a second here. You want to scroll up just a tad, Lasso?
Sure.
Okay. Let me see. How are we doing on time? Okay. So we're gonna try to expedite this. So we know what happened in between the two. And the question Lasso asked, what led up to the war? What happened to Monga Manumai and Mongale? So to
Yes.
answer Lasso's question, we had to take a step back in history and we had to introduce another Monga. And it was Monga Puletua. And any of our viewers who know, you know, what the true Taulelea name was, other than Puletua. Puletua was a name given by the European because, you know, this Monga was supportive of Laupepa's Puletua War. But I would like to know what your opinion is of who this person is, Puletua. Now, we do have an understanding who that, like where that Puletua came from. He was from Manua. Um, so there's other articles that you'll find. If you type in Monga Puletua, you want to do that, Lasso, and then
Okay.
so that we can close out this segment.
Okay. So how does it Mona?
Yeah, and then space Puletua. Yeah. And you may come across an article. So this gentleman died in, I believe, 1880, and because of his death, the next person that was close to for the title would be these two gentlemen, Lei Mongalei and Monma. Just like all of Samoa, you're gonna have rival claimants to the title, and both of them were entitled to the title. So there's nothing wrong. But then if you remember what our Samoan people were like in those years, we were a warrior society. If you wanted the title, guess what? You challenged him in war. And that's the unfortunate side. Even if it's a brother or a nephew or uncle,
Yeah.
same thing that happened in Upolu, Laupepa, Talavo. all those Maletoas, whether they were nephews or brothers, if they wanted a title, they're going to challenge you. Hey, uncle, guess what? You know, let's go to war. I want the title too. So today we always say, oh man, those families are arguing over the title. Why are they like that? Well, go read some of this history right here. If you wanted a title, you're gonna, go rally your neighbors and say, "Can you come and support me? I know you're not related to me, but I need some manpower to fight my cousin over there because I want that title." So a lot of that happened in
Wow.
Samoa. Yeah,
Which caused the division between the brothers, I believe. And so, and just the stories that I've read in the article that you sent to me, how you had this whole section of people divided and another part of the island divided just to, you're pretty much fighting with your own brothers, and that the part about them killing each other, it throws me off because it's like over a title. It's just
yeah,
pretty sad.
and if you think about the philosophy of the time, a lot of our people believed in, the spiritual nature of the power you have. As a lot of them feel like I'm divine, and if I take that step further, it's almost like a deity status. My powers are elevated when I become that, that leader. And then when the Christianity arrived, it sort of like took away that, you know, that uniqueness about our people wanting the reasons for the title. But you have to put all those things in perspective of what happened at the time. Okay, so I think we sort of answered why those two were at war, right, Lasso?
Yeah.
And it was because the title was vacant, and both of them wanted the title, and the best way to do it was let's go to war. And that's the unfortunate side. But then because the war in Upolu was also happening, Laupepa was saying, I'm trying to dissolve my own battles, because I'm trying to, become king of Samoa. You guys knock it off over there in Tutuila because we figured out we may have peace, but now you're stirring up stuff that's now going to rile up more people. And the other thing we didn't mention, also, is these guys, the Monga family, were fighting in Upolu all these wars. So now you're bringing back these warriors who come in to visit their families for a brief period. Now they come to their own families, and their own families are fighting. So you're talking about people who are, a lot of, like we talk about today, right? The trauma that they face from war. They're bringing it back to Kukuila, and now they're decimating, you know like what not Pulitua, but Manuma and Lei were destroying each other's villages, right? Burning down Fangkongo and Pongpango, just destroying each other's village, killing their own families. And I think there's a Palangi store somewhere near one of the stories. They killed all their pigs and rummaged through the store. So even the innocent people were getting involved. So Maletoa had to step in and say, "Let me send these warships. Stop that, because we need peace in Samoa." Okay. All right. Let's
Um,
see. What's our next group?
Arlington, I'm just going to mention one thing in regards to Mataafa. So the reason why we're related is because Mataafa married one of my great 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 auntie. Her name is Ned, which is Ned Purcell's daughter. So that's the relationship that he got married
Nice.
to the Purcell family.
Yeah. Now, I just feel honored to be in the presence of people that we read in the history books, and to hear like Moni and you. Like,
Mhm.
wow, I'm tied to this podcast
Right?
connects us with our historical reference here. We're talking about things all the time, but then now people are connecting the dots, and we're saying, "Oh, wow, you're actually related to that person."
Yeah, I think we had another member on the panel that we realized too that she was a part of our family as well. So, anyway, sorry, that was just a side
No,
note.
it's good.
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
like we said, bring that out so people will know those relations, because people are going to say, "Hey, Lasso and Chief Tasi, who gives you the right to talk about this family?" Well, you're going to say, I mentioned I'm a Mataafa, descendant. I can talk about it. And like I said, I'm a, descendant of the Monga family. So, you know, it's okay for me to talk about, my relatives. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I could tell you stories about that too that was shared to us by, I was telling you about my grandma, but Going back to the wars, right? Arlington, I wanted to ask you regards to like how come these stories weren't mentioned in history? Why weren't these Tutuila wars mentioned in the books? We know that the brothers, because, and the reason why I say this is because it caused a lot of rift amongst the people of the whole Tutuila, and it got others as far as the Britons involved to try to resolve this.
Yeah, and a lot of it also is because it's buried secondhand of the greater war. When you hear about Samoa's, Civil War 1 and 2, they're not saying, where do they say that some, the Atua district came to Kukuila and got Leyato and Moa and Tuitele and, Alo and Faumuina, like all these chiefs that, where is it mentioned? I mean, you do see some coverage, but it doesn't give them that much credit for taking our Tutuila warriors. Every time there was a war over there, they would come and say, "Hey, guess what? Let's go fight those wars." And they didn't hesitate. So they send folks over there fighting those wars, and that's what's written by the history books. But then now you have these quarrels that are happening in Tutuila. These stories right here, Leaso is telling us these aren't minor scuffles. 11 dead, pigs, shot, people burning, you know, villages burnt down. Tell me that's not a significant battle. They were, So
We
to answer your
we had more
question, I think it's
catastrophe on the government side than we did on Mauga's side. If for what I've read, it just showed that there was a lot of fighting. Well, they said both sides were really tough warriors in the fight, but the fact that we had a lot more on the governor's side, the government side, that had a lot of catastrophe, but they had weapons as far as as guns, ammunitions, but the other side of Mama did not. So that's very interesting.
yeah. No, it's a great point, Lea. So we see the shift in war and the power. You may have not stood up to another family clan because you may not have the numbers or just in general, but the introduction of the guns and canyons and you know ammunition, gunpowder, it shifted the power to a smaller group. So if you can attain all the guns and the ammunition, it doesn't take much for a smaller clan to defend themselves against a greater clan. And to mention the war that you were talking about, the battle of I think it was 1877, where Puletua stood his ground against the mighty Tuitele and the Leonge in Tualauta and Tualatai districts. Pretty much all the west of Kukuila were going against Moma and the east side, and they met. Where did they meet at Lasso?
They met in New Uli, right?
Uli, right? You're familiar with that part. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah, and that's where, like you were telling me, they were actually two chiefs, right?
yeah,
The chiefs on Tutele side and the chief of Monga side. They're trying their best. Hey, Monga, stand down, and Monga's like, hey, shut your mouth. I want to fight.
yeah,
And
yeah,
both of them are, you know, just true orators going at it, hoping to bring peace. But I think what there's one article that I came across. Someone accidentally fired from the west side, and
yeah. That's what
that's what started it.
started.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
once he shot, all went crazy. And what's unique about that war was you know, they were chasing the Moma side, and the Moma side they had like set up traps. It's unique because like if you're a military guy and an infantry guy, the same tactics that those Samoans at the time were called it jungle warfare. And it's amazing to listen to how they set up their ambushes. They would let them chase, and then they had fallback areas. So like, hey, you're chasing me, and then like they'll stop here and attack him. It's like what the Indians did, and then they try to regroup, and they chase them all the way to Fangasa, right?
yes.
But at the end of day one, who had the most casualties? The West Side.
Mhm.
the pursuers. And Monga and his group, I think they lost maybe two or three, right?
Mhm.
And the government, with all their mighty numbers and weaponry, were held at bay by this small, you know, rebel group. And so just wanted to share that point because I know you mentioned it. It's a good battle. Eventually, they snuck out and they made it to Ongu, and they set up Ongu and they barricaded, and um, they couldn't get to Ongu, and that's where Monga and his group held up. So amazing history, and they're all in the trove. And if you find it in the trove, maybe somebody can, make a movie out of it. Moni,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
We're gonna make a movie out of this.
Yeah, we should. Well, we need to call Eric and tell him like, hey,
Eric.
here's the script that we can. But
Okay.
let me just add to this. There was during the time of the war. Um, is there a reason why were they? I'm sure yes, they were influenced the west side of Samoa, American Samoa, which we're talking about Leone and everyone on the west coast, they were influenced by the Britain to take arms and forces with the governor, right? But is it because they felt like there was more power in the weapons that they were giving to them and they were promised protection versus we had Manga who was like, no, I want us to keep hold on our culture and not give up to the white people who are coming over to take our culture and our land and our people.
So my guess is the two governments were trying to establish a government. This is my take. I have a feeling that Tutuila were trying to establish their own leader, like, and trying to separate themselves from Samoa, Upolu and Savai, and that's sort of what they came up with. And Leonge was like the town. Leonge was built, right? Leonge was their homes were more modernized, and that's why they gave so much favor to Tuitele. And I think there was some jealousy involved, right? Because Monga wanted to be the big dog of Tutuila, and then the power was given to Tuitele, right? So that's kind of what the friction was. And Monga's thinking, man, I just signed this harbor to you. Why is this guy, Tuitele, getting all the favors? But let's not forget who Tuitele was at the time. Tuitele was not a small figure. A lot of those elites, you know, we think of them lesser today because the government and the American system, but back in those days, Tuitele was one of the powerful influences, Leyatso, Monga, Tuitele. But then, now you have these two rival claimants who want to be I want to be the voice of Tutuila. So that's sort of what, created that friction. And and
Arlington,
Monga
going
was,
back on the
yeah,
going back to the part where Mama gave up the wharf. I mean, why did Tuitele do the same for Leone's side? Because Leone also has a big entry for wharf. I mean, for these big ships to come through. The fact that Mama gave that portion up, why didn't Tuitele do the same? And why was Tuitele more favored than Manga?
because Tuitele was more obedient to the old Samoa. Remember, Tutuila fell under Atua, the Atua district. Monga
Mhm.
was slowly tired of, Atua controlling, you know, Kukuila. I mean, most of Tutuila were getting tired of it. But maybe before the superpowers were here, they couldn't really stand up against, those leadership in Upolu. But then now that they have these superpowers, they felt like, oh, I can now tell you no, right? So I think that's just my inkling of how it went down because Monga was starting to rebel a lot of what the Europeans were saying, and he was trying to control. But then, even Malietoa and everyone else said, "Who gave you the right moment to give up the harbor? The harbor was not yours, right?" So, so that's the other argument. Everyone is saying, there's an hierarchy. You don't have the voice, you know. you're not the voice of Tutuila, but somehow you made that that deal with the superpowers. So that's another side of the argument. You know, people can say, yeah, Mona didn't really have the right to give up the harbor, because a lot of Tutuila chiefs were also upset about that, because they said, Mona, you just elevated yourself to almost like a level of a king, you know, but you're not a king of Kukuila. So I think a lot of that happened. So, and again, those viewers, don't take this as fact. That's just Arlington's thought process. And if you arrive at the same conclusion one day, you know, great. But I like for you to share your thoughts. I'm just sharing my, you know, concept of what I've gathered so far. And we have a lot of bright minds who have already done the research. I'd like to hear your opinion. I'm just sharing, just my thoughts. Okay.
Hey, Arlington, I'm going to go ahead and select this so you can read out if you want some of the comments on here.
Okay.
Um,
Minority Report, interesting history. Thank you. And that's sort of why we're trying to bring this up, because a lot of folks are not aware of these. Yep.
mhm,
Not no idea about the American Samoa Wars. Thank you. So, and or sister, if I get your
mhm,
get it wrong, regime change wars have been, mo of superpower since the time immemorial. Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I said harbor. I think you're mentioning like bay. Yeah, correct.
mhm. So can I also add to what I've learned studying and reading these articles? My grandma, she talked about like the beheading, and
Mm,
I just thought like that's ridiculous. Okay, maybe that did happen, right? But that was probably centuries years ago. But she said, no, this was during our time when when she was young, and so for her grandma, her mom and dad saw these things. Well, in the article, it talked about during the war between Manga and the government, with the west side of, and it was in Nuuli, headed down towards on the east coast. They did talk about beheading.
yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Just like the Indian Wars, it's the unfortunate part of our trophy status. And you'll
Hmm.
see even in Upolu, a lot of the battles that you see across Upolu, it was taboo to behead a female, but it was okay to behead like an important figure, like a leader or tulafale, just someone important, and that's what they went after. And if you were someone important, they would behead you, and they would parade that. They actually would take it to. There's so many stories in trove that you'll come across, and the Europeans were not excited about that, but then they knew that was part of the Samoan Wars, and they would bring these heads to their chiefs. Like they bring it. Like you see stories that says, after this battle, we brought 13 heads and they laid it in front of Malietoa. Yeah, 20 heads and they laid it in front of, Mataafa or, Tamasese. Any of those leaders, because they kept rotating, they would bring the heads. So, yeah.
I've also learned that during the time when they're preparing for this war, when the HMS, I believe it's called the HMS Miranda, the British
Hmm.
ship, warship, when they had met up with Manga's team down at the bay, um, they had asked, okay, hey, where are you guys headed to? And they said, we're going to New Uli because the government, or how do I say that, Arlington? Is it the governor, the government, their group of people were in Leone.
Yeah.
And so when they went back on the ship, headed down to Leone, and when they went to Leone, they found out that there were only women,
Hmm.
children, and old men left in the village.
Yeah.
All the young men and men that were able
Yeah.
were all down in Nuuli getting ready for war.
Get up and fight. Yeah. That's like
That
we
is,
always hear this term in sports, right? So solilingu, which means, man, the whole village showed up. But in this case, it was just women and children and the elderly that were left behind, while all the fighting able people, and all the orators went to, um, you know, you had to go and fight the fight, and it was a brutal battle. So you hear a lot of the stuff that went on in Upolu. Same thing happened in Kukuila. Um, and that's what, turning our attention back to Trove. If you're interested in finding those stories, like Leaso was saying, you're going to find those stories of these intimate battles. And some of them are not, you know, if you don't have a stomach for it, because you're talking about beheadings, bullet
Cutting off the
wounds,
ears.
yeah, cutting off ears. But, Samoans, we were brutal, but Christianity has sort of masked these concepts of wars or trophies of war. But I think I mentioned to you last the other day. We talk about, even today, we hear about you know the village by Paeulupo'o. It's the name of the
Yes.
village, right? Village boat, Fautasi. Same thing. A stack of skulls, right? So the assumption is a lot of the folks were beheaded.
It was nothing to them. It was just a part of their um I don't know, upbringing, I guess, and it's a norm, I guess. And
Yeah.
so I yeah,
And I think it sort of came to the end when Mataafa's forces, um, if I'm correct, one of the wars, it was either the Germans. I might have the number incorrect, but I think they had 13 Germans after they were slaughtered, in one of the battles. The Samoans actually beheaded them and then took their heads and put them on stakes in front of their um, their headquarters. So
mm,
it reminds me of the Paipaiulupo'o story, because we're talking about skulls. And then now you have a modern story that you'll find in Trove, that the Samoans, after one of the significant battles that we defeated, I'm not saying we as taking sides, but I always say we as in Samoans.
yeah,
I take pride that we actually defeated superpowers. You're talking about them with boats and stuff like that, but they defeated them in battle,
yeah,
and their trophies were they beheaded them, and they took their heads and they put them on stakes. And it wasn't like it was trying to threaten someone. That was their way of celebrating and saying, look at us, you looked at us as primitive people, not capable of war, but look how many heads we got, right?
yeah.
And but the Germans and Americans and the British were always, even though they were against each other, they did agree on one thing: Samoa, go fight your wars, but tell your people, quit beheading each other. And it took a while for them to get that down to people. And even as late as the 18, I think it was 1890s, close to almost 1900. I want to say 1899, when Malietoa Tanumafili, came to Tutuila. He needed to go back, right? The Americans brought him on a ship, and then they took all the Tutuila warriors. So when they got back there, Matafa forces were waiting, and eventually, they had that battle. So in that battle, they pushed back the Matafa forces, and there's an article that says, the Tutuila warriors were fierce. They came back with, beheaded Matafa forces. It's the sad part of the war. Number says, well, um, heard that term a lot by Paul. Now I know where it came from. Yeah, I mean, there's a unique story to that. I was just trying to relate it, that the beheading continued to modern days, and I say modern all the way to the 1890s, where you know Tanu Mafili and Mataafa were fighting, and beheading still occurred when the Tutuila forces arrived, and you know once they encountered, they came back with some of the beheadings, and that's one of
So
the things that they
mhm,
said. The report was they were fierce fighters.
mhm,
Unfortunately, they came back with the heads, because they told them don't come back with heads. But like for me, I know that I don't know how many times I tell my soldiers don't do something, or here's the regulations, or follow the rules. It never fails. Someone always comes back and says, "Oh, I forgot. I didn't follow the rules." So I can imagine it's probably the same thing. You're telling your chiefs and you're telling your tula fathers and you're telling them, echo that down to the lowest guy.
yeah,
Don't cut off any more heads. But then in the heat of battle, they're so used to that type of mentality, and they want to celebrate, and the only way they knew how to celebrate was like, I finally killed someone important, look, commander, here's a head. So unfortunately that's part of the battle.
So Arlington, was it a 2 day war or was it 3 days? I believe it was for 2 or 3 days, right? Like maybe in between.
um you're talking about the one that were chasing them to
Yes. Yep. Yep.
that one actually lasted several months, because I think it was like November and they finally
Oh wow.
surrendered in January. Yeah. But the chase which you're
Wow.
talking about, I think that was maybe a couple of days. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we got the HMS Miranda again, the British ship involved, and so I'm gonna just put this picture up there just so everyone can see this little bit of the history. Let me see if I can find it. If you could tell us what this is about, Arlington.
Yeah. So going back to this story right here is unique. This is the one of the 1883, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, Maunga Lei, this is after them burning down each other's villages, and um, they didn't want to come. They didn't want to come to the boat. So they said, "You go first." I'm getting an echo now, so
Sorry, what was that?
I'm getting an echo. Is it echoing on your end?
Nope, nope, nope. You're
Okay.
good.
Yeah. So Malietoa orders them. He sends you know, this boat to them, or this battleship, and he, tells them they better comply, you know, or or face the consequences. So they both complied. They agreed to have peace, and the best thing to do was to bring both of them face to face. And you can imagine that also they were on the opposite ends of this ship, and
Yes.
both of the Mongas looking at each other. And in this picture right here, from my understanding, back in the days, the Tulafale, they dye their hair sandy, or like
Yep.
brownish. So you see the gentleman to his left. I'm assuming he's the Tulafale, because those are the ones that it was unique to dye their hair.
Let me
I'm
just
very
say this real quick. I don't see anybody in there that has diabetes, just an FYI.
look at Manuma. Like, man, he is in shape. I mean,
Hey,
he's the leader of their group. You're right.
yeah.
And it's funny because you read like the stories. They're talking trash back and forth, but they told him, "No, you will resolve this and shake hands and make peace." And eventually, yeah, they ended their squabble. And I think Lei and sorry, Mong Lei and Mong Ma had to go to report to um, Malietoa, had to explain what
Mhm.
happened, and that was his way of containing. Okay, so looking to your
Oh,
right, you see his hair is blonde too, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah, the
my guess
first
is that's
picture
his.
was Manga. This one is Manga Lay. The
Yeah,
other one was the family. Yeah, but yeah,
yeah.
you're right. This one here too. Also, FYI again, they too also don't look like they have diabetes.
No, none of them. And those folks were living to like hundreds. Yeah, the only thing that killed them were these wars we had. Bodies of steel back
Yeah,
then. You're right. Look at
yeah.
that. No McDonald's.
No McDonald's. Yeah. No Burger King. Darn, that's pretty sad compared to how we are now.
Right. But there's the Europeans spoke highly of their physique and their agility, the way they
Yes.
paddled their boats, and their small canoes were circling around their big ships. Um, who was that? One of the Christian missionaries said, I think it was John Williams. He said they were jumping on these ships. Just the agility, how fast they anchored against the ship, and before you know it, The way he described it almost seemed like these guys were like ninjas, how fast they got up on their boat.
Yeah, one comment says no mulipipi. That's
Oh
for
yeah, no,
sure.
no turkey tail, no gout.
No gout, no corned beef.
Oh man. But kudos to those who have family members. We're actually we're we're envying your ancestors and their physiques and their diets.
Yeah,
Um, but we're also talking about how brave they were, the courageousness that they have, no fear mentality. And these people you're talking about, how today we talk about, oh, he fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. These guys fought Vailele and you know Apia, like all those battles in Upolu. These guys were in those wars, and then they come home. Oh, I want to go home to see my wife, and guess what? My chief is fighting with his cousin over there, and now I have to fight another war in
yeah.
Kukuila. It's like it doesn't end for them, right? But we wanted to acknowledge their courageousness, and unfortunate that a lot of them had to come back to their own homeland, Kukuila, and fight again.
Hey, Arlington, can you mention something that we talked about earlier that I thought was very unique about how Tutuila was like the Albatross or whatever that's called, right? Where they keep all of the so-called bad people on the island
Yeah,
of Tutuila.
yeah, and there's a lot of publishings have stated that Tutuila was the place that when when your village or district lost battles in Upolu and Savai, you were sent to Kukuila as sort of like your punishment. Go live on that island over there. Eventually, these ragtag people of defeats, still carry the culture, were still relied upon to serve the greater district in Upolu. But then that's why we look at it, the Tutuila people were not just, you know, these lazy folks that couldn't fight. They may have lost some of the battles and that's why they're here, but then that's how they were so hardened in mentality. But then they always had to answer the call, to fight the wars in Upolu. But back then we always say they had to go to Upolu, but back then there was not like the distance wasn't that much. It was just another island. So when they asked you to go fight, you go fight. Do we know
We
how
have a
long the
question.
wars went on for? So if we're talking about the Mongol Wars, this one I think it ended. Eventually, Mongolay, he to have peace, Mongolay stepped away, and he gave up the title, and I think he went to live in Upolu for a little bit, just to for the for the peace of the family. But that didn't end there. So once Mongolay left, the next Mongol came in, and there was another Mongol battle. I think it was 1892, but we won't get into that one.
Mhm.
Um, so like we said, the Tutuila Wars, it wasn't just the Mongol family; it was the Leyato family, and then we talked about the Greater War between the Mongol and the Tuiteles. And I just want to share this, small thing that I always tell my family, because on my mom's side, I'm from the Tofa South side, and then on my dad's side, he's from Vailoa, so he's from the Lopa side. And in one of these articles I came across in Trove, it tells you who was fighting on each side. So here I have my great grandfather Tofa South fighting on one end, and then here's I have my great 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 grandfather Lopa fighting on the west side. And it says, Satele and Lopa were fighting against, these guys chasing the Omu. And I always say to myself, what happened? What would have happened if both of my ancestors were lost in that one battle? I would not exist today.
Mm,
Um, just
yeah.
that one battle alone would have wiped out my family. So I'm grateful when we have Fala Love is, I always tell the two sides. I'm grateful that we are here today, but you guys may not know there was a history where both of our families were on opposite ends of those two Tuila battles. Yeah.
So, Arlene, can I ask, you know how before we talked about how wars started? Well, pretty much we talked about the ammunitions and gun. When did that became a part of the war, our war in Samoa?
Yeah, so that goes back to the introduction of um, how would I say this? When the Germans were buying up all the land in Upolu and Savai, right? And because they amassed like hundreds of thousands of acres, you know, the Samoan people were fighting those king wars, right? When the Maliatoas were fighting each other early on, eventually Mataafa and then we're getting their skirmishes. Eventually, you're trying to get the upper hand, and the Europeans were bringing in guns by the masses and ammunition. And the downside of all of that was we're trying to win a war. And what do you do when you need to win a war? You have to buy guns. And how did they buy guns back then? By exchanging your land for guns, right? And we look at it today and we say, how stupid are you to give up your land for guns?
Yeah.
It was more important for you to win the battle, because if you win the battle, you win your enemy's land anyways. So we didn't really look at land as as we do today, but our land ownership back then was you conquer, right? You conquer that land and it's yours. So that's how I think that's the mentality it was. And they were introduced these weaponry by the white man. And I want to win this battle. And in order for me to get the upper hand is let me get this new weapon, guns, right?
Mm,
Guns eventually turn into cannons and eventually you're fighting ships. So but once our Samoan people start getting their hands on guns, things changed
yeah.
because it equalized. And how did it get so many guns? Unfortunately, that's how the Germans got hundred thousands of acres, because they probably gave up. I can imagine. Hey, let me just give you 20 acres for a gun or two. Our people are fighting each other while the powers are taking our land. Galufaya, yeah. Um, that was the sad part of it was.
Yeah. Can you elaborate? Because after we talk a lot about the history and stuff. One of the unique things about what helped protect our Samoan in Tutuila to enable us to have that land to ourselves. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Um, greed is what helped us get where we're at today. And I say
Mm,
greed by the Americans because the Americans had looked at the Germans having amassed hundred thousands of acres of land, and the Americans felt we need to get into this business too. How do we get? So they created this rival company to rival the Germans. So if we look at all these wars, we always say it's the Samoan Wars. Well, those superpowers were also fighting for land, and they were behind the scenes controlling some of our leaders as puppets in order for them to put themselves in position. So eventually, what happened was a lot of the land in Kukuila, like again, we said, used to fall under the leadership in Upolu under Atuo. So when they divided our lands, people in Upolu were saying that's not fair. We're now disconnected just because I'm over here in Upolu, I'm stuck. But people in Kukuila need to understand that's our land, but they can't come back, right? They can't come back and claim their land. So a lot of what you see in these articles are people are complaining that we've been disconnected. What do I do? How do I get remedy for my land that's now, you know, maybe it was a servant of your family who was watching your land in Kukuila, but because he's in Kukuila, now it's his land. And you hear that so much in Samoa. A lot of people have ownership in land wasn't theirs to begin with. But to answer your question, that was sort of um, a blessing in disguise because the Americans were trying to control the Germans from, you know, regaining all the land because they signed contracts, right? So the Americans were saying, we need to stop that because those were not fair contracts. We're going to try not to honor it. And eventually they put in this system that, you know, Samoans need to, retain their own land. Let's protect all this foolish reselling of land. And at first, you'll see how the slow changes where Samoans can only own land. And then eventually they started asking, well, what about all these Afakasis? Can they own land? what do the Samoan people think about these Afghans? And the Samoan people say, in Samoa, we don't see you as Afghans. If you're born, whether you're Palangi, half Chinese or whatever, you're Samoan. So, the superpowers were, they felt good to hear that the Samoans consider Afghanis as their own. They have equal share to the land. So we didn't discriminate um, of land ownership. So long as you're a Samoan, you were entitled to that land. So
That's pretty
hopefully I answered your
amazing. Yeah.
question there.
No, you did. You did. I thought it was very important to talk about that with in regards to the question that was mentioned about, the powers taking over our land. But then we had this policy that was put in place as a hidden blessings for our own people. And I
Yeah.
feel like there's still a lot of things about this policy that probably can be changed to at the same time,
Yeah.
for but at the same time it really was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
So
There's a different question. Um, how do we remedy those who had bad contracts? If you look at some of the contracts of, like, I think it was the Rainmaker area, because people were
mhm.
saying, hey, that used to be our land. And I was looking at it and I found, like, you know, this piece of land was sold for like 50 cents or 40 cents. I'm like, oh my God, really? You just gave up? What was money to our people back then? They didn't even know they were in a bad
I don't
contract.
think they understood that.
Yeah, 40 cents an acre or something like that. I'm like, how
But it
could you?
goes back to Manga, right? Who gave up the wharf and decided like, hey, this is for you guys, you can take the stock. And I don't think he understood the value of it by just,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't.
But so what Moma did was, it's controversial, but you have to look at it from the other perspective. There were more influencers other than the Germans, right? So you had the Prussians, right? The Prussians and the French were also, they were superpowers at the time. So they were also looking, they were threatening to come and take over the land. So it wasn't just the Germans and Americans and the British. You had other big players and they were threatening, you know, to come and take over your islands. So Monga was like, he was pleading. He even signed a contract with Great Britain, and the Queen just sort of ignored it. But he was trying to secure some type of protection because there was no protection, right? Um,
Mhm. Do you
so
think
we
that it
look
was
at,
the influence in Hawaii where they were able to be under the United States that they thought, okay, well, if we're under America, let me try to befriend Hawaii and try to have that same protection with the United States of America.
Hawaii was not under United States at the time, but then
Okay.
who was it? I can't remember. Was it King Kalakaua or one of the kings? And someone correct me, but whoever was a king at the time, I can't remember his name.
I
But
wouldn't know.
he proposed to, he actually came to our leaders, Malietoa, and he said, let's do this. Like, I forgot what they call it. It's like a Pacific protectorate. So, but I think that we actually signed it. I think Malietoa signed it. He wanted to have that protection as a joint Pacific Island, like a joint protection. And I think they also solicited to Tonga, but I don't think the king of Tonga accepted it, but Malietoa accepted it. But um, and that's when the Germans found out, like, oh, you're doing underground deals with Hawaii, and you're trying to not honor our contract. So I think that's why I want to make sure I get my history correct. I think that's why Malietoa was exiled, because they found out his plot, to join the Hawaiians. We were trying to find some form of protection against the Germans. I mean, the Germans were so heavily invested, um, and they pleaded to America. They pleaded to the British, like, how do you get rid of these Germans? Are on our land. I think if we were able to get rid of the Germans, we would have, had been independent from the onset. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So, how did the missionaries, you mentioned before about the missionaries and how they played a part in the war, right? So, um, I take it they also helped influence our people to stop the beheading and stop the killing and get their mindset to where they weren't doing things that they felt like it was right, right? Oh, um, Moni did
Oh,
say
there you go.
it's King
King
Kalakaua,
Kalakaua.
so you're
Thank you,
right.
Moni, lifesaver. Oh,
Thanks for
you were on
confirming.
this, Moni, because you were like, next time we're gonna bring
Yes.
Moni on.
Yeah.
Lava Moni.
And also Janet mentioned the
Janice like, Kamehameha. Yeah, Kamehameha was like beforehand. Yeah.
you
Thank you,
know
though.
what? It just makes me wonder, like, had they just left us as how we should, well, I guess leave it the way it should be, it would have been so nice to see all our own kings from each island come together, just talk and, protect our own island. But at the same time, how can you when you have all these guns and ammunitions from the superpowers, right? So then you have to make alliance with all these different superpowers for protection. It's crazy. Um, here's a comment.
While I'm listening to you both, I'm also thinking how things could have been, could be we are two Samoas. We're still, yeah.
Yeah,
It's frustrating that we couldn't resolve things on our own, but
yeah,
then it was hard for our leaders to come into an agreement because there was one point where all our leaders agreed we're gonna king one individual, but then whether the Germans felt like, oh, Malito is not the right person, let's get rid of him. So
yeah,
you always had these players in the back, and like I said, the evil empire is the Germans and their land ownership, and the only reason why they had a foothold was they had these German ships. And here you have a company who has no military authority. That company leaned on these, German battleships, and that was his protectorate. But I think if those battleships weren't there from the get-go, the Samoans would have long gotten rid of that, you know, those plantations. Pacific Island Confederation. Thank you. Moni is making this complete. So, if you're studying and you're looking at what we're piecing together, that's what Moni's saying. That's the Germans, and I call that the evil empire from the beginning. They were the reason why Samoa struggled so mightily. But if it wasn't for those German warships parked out there, that's how they had all that protection. One day, we're gonna do a follow up on this, and we're gonna bring Moni because
yeah.
Moni will make this story, more organized.
Right.
So we're kind of like, snaking around, but Moni's like, it's this, guys. Come on.
No, we gotta trick Moni to get on. Like, don't tell him what we're doing, and then just say it's not even gonna be live. We're just pre-recorded, but put it live.
I love Moni. The problem our people have, no one wants to back down to the other. If you're Koilalo, yeah, exactly. No one wants to, to your point, that's sort of what we're talking about. Everyone feels like I have this divine leadership, I have this divine power because I come from this, lineage. I should have authority, and that's what was going on. And I'm not saying anyone was wrong because I look at everyone's lineage and I say, yeah, I can see why you fought so hard because you felt like it was time for your people to be in control, and then other ones saying the same thing. And I'm looking at you too, also have a beautiful history and respectable lineage, so I can see why your argument is there too. So Pacific was a major trading route. Whoever controlled the Pacific controlled the global economy. King Kalakaua tried to use his already globally recognized status to unite the Pacific. Yeah, and that's exactly what was going on, and I couldn't have said it better than Brother Moni. And thank you for completing that for our audience. And
Alex, and I'm gonna
right,
go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I'm gonna jump into something else. I
Yeah,
wanted to ask about the Tutuila Mau and the Tui Manu'a title. Is that okay?
yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So, what was the Tutuila Mau movement, and why is it not as well known as the Upolu Mau?
Yeah, I think both modes are important, and I think they were very similar. It's just that unfortunately one has a terrible history, and the outcome was
Oh,
bloodshed, and it's in our songs, and it hurts us today to think about it. We didn't want that outcome, but Also, the difference was their rule was more brutal than the way the Americans uh, ruled American Samoa. It didn't mean that our leadership of the time weren't tired of the naval leadership. It just wasn't as brutal as how our brothers in the West were facing. So the two Maos did exist, um, but then everything is recorded from every chief that they interviewed. I'm just talking about the Tutuila Mau. They asked, are you part of the Mau? And then in that booklet, it captures who was for the Mau and why and so forth. But I feel a lot of our leaders at the time, they may have been for the Mau, but then when it came to being scrutinized, because now you have all the eyes on you, and now the Americans are there to criticize you or critique you and your involvement. A lot of them backed down and they said, "No, I wasn't part of the Mau. That wasn't um, what I stood for." But eventually, a lot of them said, "We're satisfied," because they said, "Are you happy with how the naval leadership is?" And a lot of them agreed. But I need to go find that. Maybe Moni can point this out. There was an interesting person that stood up, and if I'm correct, his last name was Tuyasopo. And what I'm trying to bring out is he he said, "You know what? What I want to bring up is, and I want the government to look into this. I want to get rid of the Samoa Fa'alave excessiveness." And also, we talked about this just recently in January. Like,
Yeah.
our Fa'alave laves are so excessive. And we say that today, right? We say that today because we're tired of how our families are getting bankrupt and pushed into poverty because of how large our events are. We're pouring our every source of income into it. Back then, when the Mao was happening, someone stood up and wanted to change that. They said, "Is there any way we can make a law to minimize all this excessiveness? Because people are you know taking all our fruits and vegetables and our pigs. Whatever's someone's birthday or someone's funeral or wedding. I have to slaughter like my whole you know l- you know pig collection and
Yeah.
just to support that." So someone was voicing that opinion, and imagine if that change had happened back then. All our five lovers, at least in Tutuila, would have been changed that day, but we still see it today. And you know, I know it kind of deviated, a bit, but that stood out to me. You know, what someone had voiced their opinion early on. How do you pronounce that? It looks like marital Tuyasopo. And thank you. Hey, at least I got Tuyasopo right. And I'm gonna pat myself on the back for getting something right.
Oh, it's Mariota?
Mariota. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my Lofi's kids, my cousin Lofi, and that's her family, her husband's family. And now I know where the name
Um,
comes from. Sorry, Lofi. I try to study history, but man, everything is
mhm.
connecting the dots here. Now, when I see my nephew, I'm gonna say, I know where you get your name from. Luffy's probably like looking at me, "You idiot."
So, Arlington, so even back then, they wanted to change this with the Fat Lave Lave.
Yeah, and you know, it's an issue we're still dealing with today. And yeah, imagine if he had it his way. But then that wasn't their focal point. Their focal point is you know, are you leadership in Kukuila trying to overthrow the Navy? Are you dissatisfied? Should we leave you alone? Can you self-govern without us? And maybe they wanted that, but maybe at the same time they were afraid that what would happen if we do? What would happen then? Oh, and then another person actually said, um, "You know what, America, I love what you're doing here. Is there any way you can unite us with our brothers in the West? We don't like how they're being treated under their leadership. Can you, America, go and put Upolu and Savai under you, United States, because we like how you lead us?" But someone proposed that, and America said, we sort of have an agreement. It's unfortunately what's happened over there. We can't, you know. we'll probably start another
Wait,
war.
wait, you're saying that there are some talks that those in Western Samoa, Savai, wants to be combined with American Samoa under the United States, right?
No, one of our Tutuila chiefs knew what they were going through, and because they're Mau, right? They were fighting their own Mau. But the families talk, so they know the hardship that they were under. That type of rule. And one of our chiefs proposed, "Hey, America, can you, you know, just go take over that island over there and unite us with our brothers, put us under United States." And I know someone asked the question, is there, could you imagine us being united? There was an
Yeah.
opportunity maybe, but then maybe they didn't want to fight those wars and had a respect for each other and left it alone.
We have a comment here.
The church has a big role to play in Samoa. Need changes to be made. Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking you're going back to the Fa'alablave stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then New Zealand administrations were evil. Yeah, see, and then this person's, they're talking about the Mau. So the Germans were there ruling Samoa, and then we're like, okay, we're tired of them. But then New Zealand comes in, and it was far worse, right? And
Now, going back to the Tui Manu'a, I mean, the title is no longer. Do we need to bring that title up, or is it best to keep it in history?
I guess the fear was, if you have an influential leader that almost has the power of the king, if the Samoa were to revert back and give them the honor and respect that we've always had in the past, I guess the concern was, then you will not want to follow the American law anymore, because now you have someone greater, right? That will have his own rules and their own Samoa laws. That a lot of our laws were abandoned to adapt to the new American way. But I mean, what big titles like Malietoa, like, do they really have like a threatening role to the Samoan people like they did back then? I mean, I think we've modernized ourselves to where the respect is there. But that's the answer for a Manua people. But it's been so long. Can
Yeah.
we return to that old life? Samoan life.
Yeah, the Samoan life where we had no cancer, we had no gout, we had no diabetes, none of that stuff, right? Because of the influence right now. But I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. But I wanted to also ask, as far as our people, you mentioned about Kramer in the last podcast we had with the wars that went on in Tutuila, because Kramer was really into Tutuila most of the time, right?
Hmm.
Did he write about this war that went on, or was he just not? Was he told not to talk about it? Was it something that it was so gruesome that they didn't want that on the books? They didn't
Oh,
want us to
they're
remember.
they're written in different parts of Kramer's books.
Okay.
If you look at the village Fa'alupenga, and I know we covered Fa'alupengas in the past, and this is where it's the village honorifics, right? The honors for each village, and it'll say, let's say your village, and it says, we honor you, you know, Leaso, and then they'll say in the footnotes, they'll say, um, your significance, right? Your significance in battle. So they do offer that insight in Kramer's, and it'll tell like what battles you won, right?
Oh,
It'll say, okay, let me just give you an example. In Monga Tofasau's lineage, which is available on public, so I'm careful not to say that I'm sharing something I can't share, because this is already in public. If you go in Kramer's book and you look up the Monga Ngafa, and on the right hand side it says Monga Puletua, and that's what, like, we're talking about Puletua earlier, and I was studying Kramer. I'm like, okay, who is this Puletua? And then in the footnotes it says, this is the guy who fought the war for Malietoa, Laupepa. And that's how, like, I was able to connect the dots. Like, how did he get the name Puletua? And he got his name from the Puletua War, Malietoa's Puletua War. So it's unique that, to answer your question, yeah, there are documentation like how so and so got his name, and they're written all over in the side. Yeah,
And I wanted to add to these warriors that we talked about in Tutuila, and it's almost like a lot of them were afraid to speak up when it came down to, questioning them towards the end because they were afraid to be exiled, kind of like how it was with Lilio Kalani. She was taken to jail within her own home, right? And so
hmm,
they did the same thing with our people, where they took them to exile to different islands,
yeah,
and some of them weren't able to come back home. So I feel like there was so much that our people could have done, even our stronghold men that ruled each tribes, but they couldn't because of guns and ammunitions, kind of
yeah.
like what our the Indians had to go through in America. So
Right. And we talk about exile, and most of the time you only hear about when Mataafa was exiled, when Malietoa was exiled, when Asi was exiled, Tuda Tufunga was exiled. But then, Monga was also exiled. But then, we're careful to say which one because I know I came across on Facebook someone said, hey, that was the Monga that was exiled. And then the family of that Monga say, hey, watch your mouth. History was told
oh,
wrong. That is not our Monga that got exiled. That was another Monga. So,
mm,
you know, but history does say, and you'll find it in Trove, it says Monga was exiled. But then I'm just going to leave it as that. And I have like my theory of which one it is, but I'm not going to go into it. But read Trove. Trove will tell you which one was exiled, and you can connect the dots. Okay. Tui Manu'a is a title from heaven given from Tangaloa. U.S. Navy wanted to use it as a puppet, so the title died with Elisara, and the U.S. suppressed its revival through the court system. Trial of the Ipu. Perfect. That's all our transition. Can you pull that up?
yeah.
The Facebook
Oh,
PDF
got
you were
it.
gonna. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing up the question because we actually had this, and we're gonna bring this up for you. Okay. Yeah.
Is it this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you can enlarge it a little bit for our audience. Okay. And again, like I mentioned earlier in our podcast, Marion, who runs the American Samoa Through the Years page, I know Marion lives in Trove, and we're going back to Trove where you get your information. And then Marion is such a like a history buff. If you look at the second paragraph, it sort of covers what you just mentioned in the comments. When the Tui Manu'a was unmoved with the offer, superior weaponry was used. The entire trial of the Ipu occurred because the judge Gurr was in direct conflict with the Tui Manu'a over the missing tax money in the copra industry. He sent Moi Moi on a gunboat to create a ruse, and these were all ploys to impose the imperialist powers to force the Manua under U.S. session. So the rest of it, you can pretty much understand. And a lot of people say it's conspiracy. I don't think it's conspiracy. I think it's truth what Marion just wrote. Um, but it's not spoken because it's buried in our U.S. history, and people in our U.S. education system don't want to speak the truth, and they don't want to expose what really happened here. Instead, what you see in our government websites and everything published is saying what, oh yeah, Tumanua, he willingly agreed, and all of his chiefs were happy to join America. You know, please tell the truth.
Yeah.
And a lot of Manua people don't really like to, celebrate and say, thank you for, let's celebrate, the birth of our raising of the flag, because the truth is they were forced, right? And the greater picture here that is untold by the unfortunate situation with Manua was, as we say, Moi Moi was used as a puppet to force Tui Manua into, how would you say it, hoping that he would do something crazy and stand up for himself. And then we go in with now these big battleships and, you know, force them into submission. But thank God, Tui Manua, thought about his people and say, you know, why am I gonna have all this bloodshed? How am I supposed to stand up against all these people? They'll just decimate all my people, because I don't want to relinquish my title. So it is what it is today, but this is the truth right here. It's one of the few
Yeah.
things I'll stand with. Um, the Manua people were two Manua were forced their hand were forced to submit under the U.S. and I'm glad that this is out there. And so for our people out there listening, um, go do some research into it, and the truth should be shared across for others to learn about.
Well, Arlington, we've got one more segment to go. Are you okay with that?
Oh yeah, we're good. Me in history, like I can go all day about this.
Yeah. All right, so Tusitala versus the newspapers extra. Do
Yeah.
you believe that Tusitala, Robert Louis Stevenson, helped or harmed Samoa's historical legacy?
Um. Let's see. What did I do in my Tustala book? Anyways, at least from the one book that I've been reading, and I was never a how would you say it? Those type of books, like fairy tales or his book is a little bit hard for me to read because it's more of like a storytelling.
Is it more parables?
No, it's more how would you say it? Like true storytelling. It's like bringing the ambiance and more descriptive, more than you need, right? Like instead of just saying, they went and fought in Lily, he'll just say, the land was beautiful and the trees were, green and
Oh,
lush green and, you know,
it's kind of
there's
poetic,
birds
right?
chirping in the air. Like, get to the point, man.
Yeah.
But then he uses all this symbology and, that was his way. It's like Huckleberry Finn type of stories. But anyways, um, he does get close up in some of the battles. There are some images that I came across that we see all today, where the Samoan soldiers are lined up and they're setting this little berm with all the guns, and you see the women behind the men, giving them water. So you see
Yes.
that picture and you say, without any context, just looking at it, you say, what kind of defensive position are you in? It doesn't make any sense of how you're setting up your fighting position. But then you read Tusitala's books, but it makes sense. Okay, he tells you where the enemy is in. They're approaching perpendicular from the beach. So a lot of it is work complements, what's out there. So I think it was valuable to his contribution is worth the read. But then I go as far as to say he is just like every other person out there. He does criticize a lot of both sides of the Samoas, you know. So if you're going to read his work and you are a family of a particular group, just have thick skin because he's going to say some things that you may not want to hear about your family. But I try to keep an open mind. If he's criticizing, this group, I just have to say, you know, he's criticizing both groups, but he's telling you the weakness of such and such strategy. But he does talk about, the Germans. Like he goes into detail of everyone that was in control of the administration, the companies, the captains of the battleships, the Americans. He even walks you through, the thought
Oh,
process, like why did the Germans keep switching sides? You're for Mataafa, you're against Mataafa. Mataafa embarrasses you and kills all your men. And then later on you exile him and then you turn around and make him your hero. He does say things like that, right? And so you sort of appreciate, those intimate details that sort of mirrors what you see on, you know, in the history books.
wow. Well, thank you so much, Arlington, for talking about, giving us history because this is so important. And I hope that those who are out there getting ready to, who are listening are able to take that knowledge and share with your family as well and do your research. So, one more last question to you, Arlington.
Mhm.
What is one story from Tutuila's past you believe every young Samoan should know?
Yeah, the story of the great warrior Fua'autoa, right? So um, another tragedy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
um, the story of Wautoa, he's one of the true warriors of Tutuila. We hear about a lot of the
Mm.
warriors on the other side. We hear, um, the Saveas, the Maliatoas, the Tuna and Fatsa, Tuna and Tuna, like all these different, important figures in history, in the Samoa history in Samoa. But then you ask for the warriors in Tutuila, and people are silent, and they always say, "Oh yeah, we were rescued by these two brothers." But then no one talks about Fa'utoa. Fa'utoa was the Tutuila toa, like he was
Wait,
our warrior, he
Arlington,
was our leader,
is
right?
is this the one with the daughter?
No, this is not the one with the daughter.
Okay, okay, go ahead.
Um, yeah, he was just the important leader in Samoa, and it goes back to the Samoa and Tongan War, and he was the one that suppressed the or removed the Tongans from Tutuila. So you
Oh
hear a lot
wow.
about those, who removed the Tongans from Upolu and Savai, but then people ask, did they rescue Kukuila too? It's like no, Tutuila had their own tool, and a lot of people forget about his works, and he was one of Maunga's men, and from Pango. So just wanted to recognize some of those folks because we started and say we wanted to honor the warriors of Tutuila and the battles that they fought, and take nothing away from Upolu because we know your stories. We know the stories of Savai, but this one was a dedicated segment for Tutuila for a lot of folks who don't know our Tutuila stories. So that's why we're acknowledging Fuauto. Yeah.
Thank you, Arlington. We got comments here.
I'm inspired by you both. Thank you both for such a refreshing session. Next time, let's do it over coffee and German buns. Moni, next time we're gonna bring you on here because you were our missing link. And no, thank you, Moni. You're always a great mind for us. Um, you've gained a lot of fans from all the things that we've read from your support, and you have a valuable mind of what you contribute to our panel and our podcast overall. So thank you.
Yeah.
Fantasy, lol.
All right. Well, we are closing our, we're at the end of our podcast. And again, thank you so much to everybody. Arlington, any more last words before we end?
Yeah, like like as we always do in the Samoa culture, if we offended you in any way, of course, apologize. And like they say in Samoa, take that wrong that we did to you and don't hold it to heart. Toss it far at sea or toss it to, a land far and beyond. It was not intended to spark hate or anything to your families. And of course, apologize if our words have come across that way. But as we started, we said that this is just an opinion, and everything is opinion based on research. And we welcome your piece. As we always said, we will never have all the stories, but we like to share what we've gained just from our basic research. And we welcome you to do your own study in Trove. And I think that's the best thing that you brought up, Lasso, was introducing Trove to our audience because we want to
Yeah.
give you a different perspective of what's out there. And so thank you, Lasso, for introducing Trove to the audience. And I think that's a valuable tool. And when we do another segment, I want you to, as our audience, bring what you've learned. And if you say, "Hey, Arlington, you mentioned something that I don't agree with," I welcome that because I need you to help me better understand a different perspective from what I had studied. So that's all I have for today. And again, thanks to the audience for your contribution and for all our viewers. And one last thing, Trove is not a Samoan thing. It benefits all of the Pacific. So I know tonight's segment was on Tutuila, and that's why we wanted to isolate Tutuila and how valuable Trove was into understanding the Tutuila Wars, the Tutuila Warriors, Tutuila Chiefs, and so forth. So that's all I wanted to share with our audience. Yeah.
And thank you again to Arlington for sharing his findings and research. This is so important because when he introduced me to his findings, the history and trove, and other resources. It blew my mind because, again, these are stuff that we don't learn in school. And the fact that I'm just now learning these things, I'm also going to pass this on to my kids so that, I don't want a generation to be skipped and not be able to learn about their culture and their history and not have that pride within them to, hey, to say, hey, well, my family was a part of this journey and my family was a part of this movement. And so this is something that's very inspiring and also motivating, that hopefully those in the next generation to come are able to utilize these information and share. And like what we said earlier, back then we had nothing but Balangi people that were writing these information and history for us. Well, it's about time that we, our people, write the history,
Hmm.
change that narrative, and be able to take all the information that was written down by, for example, Kramer, Robert Louis Stevenson's, and all those who have written these books and these articles, and take what you've been passed down for generation, oral interpretation by your family, your great great grandparents, or whatever, and put those information together and write these books, because it's so important that we carry that information not just from one family to another, but we all as a whole, as Polynesia, put that information together so that we can share with one another. And so that's my say. And also to our audience out there, thank you so much for participating and putting your inputs. We welcome all who have their own opinions and their thoughts. And we love you all. And to end this, to God be all the glory. You guys have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.